Now I'll invite you to make sure you're in speaker view for our sermon. He was born Michael Lewis King in 1929, and his father and his maternal grandfather before him were Baptist ministers. His father changed his name to Martin Luther King Sr. around 1934 after a trip to Germany, and his son did the same sometimes afterwards. In many religious traditions, personal transformations are denoted by changing your name, and his name became Martin Luther King Jr., even though nothing was ever officially filed with the state. He was raised in a very well-off, very well-educated family. When he was 12, his beloved grandmother died, and he blamed himself. He was so guilt-ridden that he attempted suicide by jumping out of a two-story window. He was a brilliant child, attended segregated public schools. At the age of 15, he was admitted to Morehouse College, the alma mater of his father and his maternal grandfather, where he studied medicine and law. He initially had no interest in becoming a minister, but by 1948, at the age of 19, he earned a Bachelor's of Divinity degree, won a prestigious fellowship, and was elected president of his predominantly white senior class. King then enrolled in a graduate program at Boston University, earning a doctorate in systemic theology. He was 25 years old. In 1966, he spoke as the Ware lecturer at the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly in Florida. He was 37. Now, here I must insert that all preachers are challenged to speak to a group of liberal, progressive, Unitarian Universalists to attempt to pry their fingers free from their death grip of being in their head. For generations, preachers have tried to push, pull, drag, nudge, or persuade Unitarian Universalists into being a whole person of mind, heart, soul, and action. Too many of us live in our heads, and we can rationalize not acting on anything, and we become silent about things that matter. So how does a preacher like Martin Luther King tell a group like us that our lives are beginning to end because mostly all we do is think, discuss, and watch what is going on around us? Dr. King gave his lecture in 1966 to several thousand Unitarian Universalists, and it was titled, "Don't Sleep Through the Revolution." I'd like to quote a few paragraphs out of that speech. Dr. King said, "I'm sure that each of you has read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. One thing we usually remember about the story of Rip Van Winkle is that he slept 20 years. But there's another point in that story which is almost always completely overlooked. It is the sign on the end of the little town on the Hudson from which Rip went into the mountains for his long sleep. When he went up, the sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. When Rip Van Winkle looked at the picture of George Washington, he was amazed. He was completely lost. He knew not who he was. This incident reveals to us that the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that he slept 20 years, but he slept through a revolution. Dr. King goes on to say, one of the great misfortunes of history is that all too many individuals and institutions find themselves in a great period of change, yet fail to achieve the new attitudes and outlooks that the situation demands. There is nothing more tragic than to sleep through a revolution. In 1938, American folk singer and songwriter Lead Belly wrote a song about the Scottsboro Boys. And that song contained this line. I advise everyone to be a little careful when they go along down there. Stay woke. Keep your eyes open. Stay woke. Stay woke is a rallying cry of the Black Lives Matter movement. And for me, it harkens back to Dr. King's message to the Unitarian Universalist in 1966, don't sleep through the revolution. Are you living in your head? Are you woke? Are you sleeping through the revolution? The revolution today is the same one as the 1960s. It's about institutional racism that has come out of the shadows and now in full light, where it struts and prances like a drunken braggart. The revolution is still about racism. How else could a Confederate flag be paraded around the U.S. Capitol without interference? The revolution is still about bigotry and hatred. What else would make a Virginia man try and get past D.C. checkpoints with false inauguration credentials and an unregistered gun with more than 500 rounds of ammunition? The revolution is still about freedoms denied. What else can explain voter obstructions silently installed by gerrymandering areas to keep the ruling parties in power? The revolution is still about violent intimidation. What else could explain that police lethal force creates a fatality rate 3 times higher among blacks than whites? The revolution is still about misinformation and hatred. What else can explain the root of the January 6th insurgents? Stay woke. Don't sleep through the revolution. Dr. King in 1966 also told us, quote, "It's not enough for the church to work in the ideological realm and to clear up misguided ideas. To remain awake through this social revolution, the church must engage in strong action programs to get rid of the last vestiges of segregation and discrimination." David Brooks, in his book, Road to Character, writes, "Recently I've been thinking about the difference between resume virtues and the eulogy virtues. The resume virtues are the ones you list on your resume, the skills that you bring to the job market that contribute to external success. The eulogy virtues are deeper. They're the virtues that get talked about at your funeral, the ones that exist at the core of your being. Whether you were kind, brave, honest, faithful, and what kind of relationships you formed." David Brooks' words remind me and makes me think about Dr. King's message and what it can mean for us today. What will your eulogy say about today's revolution? Will your eulogy say that he thought deeply and passionately about social issues? Or will it say he helped a few people in need with money, words, deeds, and encouragement? Will your eulogy say that she was always up to date about worldwide news and breaking stories? Or will it say she spoke up and called out as wrong racial slurs, jokes, and disparities, even when she was a guest at a dinner table? Will your eulogy say that he achieved 2 PhDs from prestigious universities? Or will it say he tutored adults and children to learn English? Will your eulogy say she slept through the revolution? Or will it say he wrote letters, emails, phone calls, and visited prisoners? She adopted a farm worker family. He donated to humanitarian causes. She listened to everyone, especially people with different views than hers. What will your eulogy be? My prayer for all of you and myself is this: stay woke. Don't sleep through this revolution. May it be so. Amen, and blessed be.